Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today we're going to be exploring what it means to live a life aligned with God's will.
Okay.
And we're turning to a fascinating source for this. Chapter 37 of the Quran, called the Aligners, or Es-Safat.
Yeah.
We've got some excerpts here.
Okay.
And let me tell you, it's a powerful read.
Absolutely.
It dives into some really big questions like the existence of one God,
Right.
Judgment Day, the role of prophets,
Yeah.
and the ultimate consequences of our choices, heaven and hell.
It's fascinating how this chapter, like the Quran in general, really blends those profound theological concepts with these captivating stories.
Yeah.
It's not just, laying down the law.
Right.
It's drawing you in with these really vivid narratives and asking you to think about what it all means.
It definitely grabbed my attention. I mean, we're
Yeah.
talking about the tree of bitterness in hell
Right.
with fruits that look like devil's heads.
It's a very evocative image.
Yeah, that's an image that stays with you.
Yeah.
But before we get into all that,
Sure.
maybe we should start with the basics.
Okay.
For those who might not be familiar, can you explain the concept of Allah
Absolutely.
and what it means to believe in one God?
So Allah is the Arabic word for God.
Okay.
And in Islam, the belief in Allah as the one true God is paramount. It's the foundation of the entire faith.
Right.
It means believing that he is the creator and sustainer of everything,
Okay.
the all-powerful, the all-knowing, and that there is no other deity worthy of worship.
So this idea of one God,
Yes,
it kind of permeates everything.
it does.
And chapter 37 really drives home this point.
Right, from the beginning, it emphasizes the absolute oneness of Allah.
Okay.
His dominion over the heavens and the earth, everything. It's a rejection of any form of polytheism or associating partners with God.
And this belief in one God ties directly into the idea of judgment, right?
Absolutely.
That we're accountable to this one God for our actions.
Yes.
And it's not just something abstract. The chapter makes the day of judgment feel incredibly real.
It does. The Quran describes this day when everyone will be awakened from death with a single earth-shattering nudge.
Wow.
It's a moment of reckoning, a time to face the consequences of your actions in this life.
It's almost like you can feel the weight of that moment, that realization that there's no escaping accountability.
Absolutely.
It's pretty intense.
The chapter vividly portrays this scene where all of humanity is gathered, including those who chose to worship idols instead of Allah.
Right.
They'll be brought forth, questioned about their choices, and ultimately held responsible.
It's a powerful reminder that our actions have eternal implications.
They do.
It's like that verse where people try to shift the blame,
Right.
saying to those who led them astray, you used to come at us from the right, implying some kind of authority.
Yes.
But the response is chilling. You yourselves were not believers. We had no authority over you. You yourselves were rebellious people.
That exchange really underscores the idea of individual responsibility. On that day, no one can blame anyone else for their choices.
Right.
You are accountable for your own actions, your own beliefs.
It really makes you think about the choices we make every day, doesn't it?
It does.
Knowing that we'll be held accountable.
Absolutely.
And it's interesting because amidst all this talk of judgment,
Yes.
the chapter also brings in these stories of prophets who were sent to guide humanity.
Right.
It's like a mini history lesson within this larger message.
Yes. It highlights this long lineage of messengers, figures like Noah, Abraham, Moses, Aaron, Elijah, and Jonah.
Wow, that's quite a lineup.
Each story, while unique, offers these timeless lessons about faith,
Okay.
obedience, and facing challenges head on.
I'm particularly drawn to the story of Abraham.
Yes.
He's commanded by God to sacrifice his own son,
Right?
which seems almost impossible to comprehend.
It's a difficult concept.
What's the significance of this act?
It's a powerful symbol of ultimate submission to God's will.
Okay.
Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son, even though it went against every human instinct.
Right. Demonstrates the depth of his faith and his unwavering trust in God's plan.
It's not about blind obedience, though, right?
No, not at all.
I mean, Abraham talks to his son about it,
He does.
and his son willingly participates.
Yes.
There's this sense of dialogue and understanding even within this profound act of faith.
Exactly. It highlights the importance of open communication, even in matters of faith and obedience. And of course, in the end, God doesn't require the actual sacrifice.
Right.
It's the willingness, the
Yep.
pure intention that matters most.
So it's about that internal struggle, that commitment to aligning your will with God's will,
Yes.
even when it's difficult or doesn't make immediate sense.
Absolutely.
It's a powerful message.
It resonates with many people, regardless of their background, because it speaks to this fundamental human experience of facing difficult choices
Right.
and needing to find the strength to trust in something bigger than ourselves.
Absolutely. Now, we've got Noah, who builds the ark and survives the flood.
Right.
Moses and Aaron leading the Israelites out of Egypt.
Yes.
And Jonah, who tries to run away from God's command and ends up, well, swallowed by a giant fish.
Quite a story.
It's like each story is a parable with its own unique lesson. What connects these narratives and why are they included in this chapter?
So what's fascinating here is that each story, while specific to the prophet's experience, reflects broader themes of faith, obedience, and resilience. They show us how to live a life pleasing to God, even when surrounded by disbelief and temptation.
Right.
They serve as examples for all believers, highlighting the challenges and triumphs that come with following God's path.
So they're not just historical accounts.
Right.
They're meant to guide us,
Absolutely.
to inspire us in our own lives.
Yes.
They remind us that we're not alone in our struggles.
Exactly. And it's interesting how these prophets are presented not just as individuals, but as part of a continuous lineage,
Okay.
each building upon the message of the one before.
Right.
It underscores the idea that God's message is consistent and timeless, revealed gradually through different messengers to suit different times and contexts.
So there's this thread of continuity.
Yes.
This ongoing revelation that connects them all.
Exactly.
It's a powerful idea.
It is.
But we've talked a lot about the prophets and their stories.
Sure.
Let's shift gears a bit.
Okay.
Chapter 37 doesn't shy away from depicting the rewards of heaven and the punishments of hell.
Right.
And let me tell you, those descriptions are vivid.
They are.
It's not just vague talk about good and bad places.
No.
It gets pretty specific.
Right. It's almost like you're getting a glimpse into these realms,
Yeah.
experiencing them through these incredibly descriptive verses. And it's not just for shock value.
Right.
It serves a deeper purpose.
Okay, I'm really curious now.
Yeah.
What is that deeper purpose? Why go into such detail about heaven and hell?
Think about it. Heaven is described as this lush garden with rivers of pure water and delicious fruits. A place of peace and beauty.
Okay.
You're surrounded by good company, reclining on luxurious furnishings,
wow.
enjoying drinks that never spoil or intoxicate.
It sounds idyllic.
It's meant to evoke a sense of ultimate contentment and serenity.
Yeah.
But then you have hell, which is described in much more, shall we say, visceral terms.
Definitely.
It's depicted as a realm of unending torment.
Okay.
Imagine scorching heat that never subsides,
Right.
being forced to drink boiling liquids,
Right.
and encountering that tree of bitterness with its devil head fruits.
Oh, yeah.
It's meant to evoke fear and revulsion,
Right.
to really drive home the consequences of choosing a path that leads away from God.
It's pretty intense imagery, for sure.
It is.
It definitely makes you think twice about your choices.
Right.
But I'm sensing there's more to it than just scaring people into submission.
You're right.
Yeah.
These vivid descriptions aren't just about fear or punishment.
Okay.
They serve as powerful motivators.
Okay.
The promise of heaven inspires believers to strive for a life that aligns with God's will, a life worthy of such a reward. And conversely, the fear of hell acts as a deterrent, prompting people to turn away from sinful actions that would lead to such a fate.
So it's not just about blind obedience.
No.
It's about understanding the consequences of our actions.
Yes.
And making choices that lead to spiritual growth and closeness to God.
Absolutely.
It's about finding that balance between hope and accountability.
Exactly. It's a reminder that our choices matter, not just in this life, but in the eternal realm as well.
Yeah.
It's about recognizing the weight of our decisions and striving to make choices that align with our values and beliefs.
So we've covered a lot of ground already.
Uh-huh.
The concept of one God, the reality of Judgment Day, the guidance offered by the prophets,
Right.
and the contrasting realities of heaven and hell.
Yes.
It's fascinating how chapter 37 weaves all these ideas together,
It does.
creating this tapestry of Islamic theology.
Absolutely.
But there's still so much more to explore,
There is.
especially regarding the arguments against those who doubted the message of Islam
Right.
and the ultimate triumph of believers.
Yes.
We'll delve into all of that in the next part of our deep dive.
Okay.
Stay tuned.
Sounds good. Welcome back. We've been exploring what it means to live a life aligned with God's will.
Right.
Delving into chapter 37 of the Quran, the aligners.
Yeah.
Before the break, we were discussing those incredibly vivid depictions of heaven and hell.
They really make you think, don't they?
They do. I mean, it's one thing to talk about reward and punishment in the abstract.
Right.
But the Quran paints these incredibly detailed pictures that really get your attention.
I'm curious.
Yeah.
What else does the chapter tell us about these ultimate destinations?
Well, when it comes to heaven, it's described as this garden of bliss. Imagine crystal clear rivers flowing.
Wow.
Trees laden with delicious fruits.
Okay.
And the company of pure companions.
Right.
You'd be reclining on luxurious furnishings.
It sounds amazing.
Facing each other.
Yeah.
In this atmosphere of ultimate comfort and fellowship.
So peaceful.
And the drinks served. They're described as white and delightful, never spoiling or causing intoxication.
Oh, wow.
It's meant to evoke a sense of ultimate contentment and serenity.
It sounds like pure serenity.
Yes.
A state of complete contentment and joy. But then we have hell, which is painted in a much darker light.
Yes, the imagery used for hell is quite visceral.
Yeah.
It's a place of scorching heat and unending torment.
Oh, wow.
The inhabitants are forced to drink boiling liquids that burn their insides.
I see.
And then there's that image of the tree of bitterness.
Right.
Growing from the depths of hell.
Yep.
With fruits that resemble devil's heads.
Yeah, that's not something you easily forget.
It's not.
These descriptions are certainly meant to evoke strong emotions.
Absolutely.
But they're not just there for shock value, are they?
Exactly. They serve a deeper purpose.
Okay.
These detailed depictions of heaven and hell act as powerful motivators for believers. The promise of heaven inspires them to live righteously,
Okay.
striving for a life that would earn them such a reward.
I see.
And the fear of hell serves as a deterrent,
Right.
prompting them to turn away from sinful actions that would lead to such a fate.
So it's not just about fear or blind obedience.
Right.
It's about understanding the potential consequences of our actions, both positive and negative.
Yes.
And using that knowledge to guide our choices.
Absolutely.
It's about striving to make decisions that lead to spiritual growth and closeness to God.
Precisely. And it's worth remembering that these descriptions of heaven and hell aren't necessarily meant to be taken literally.
Okay.
They're more like symbolic representations
okay.
of ultimate bliss and ultimate suffering,
Okay.
meant to guide us towards a righteous path.
That makes sense. Now, besides the descriptions of heaven and hell,
Yeah,
we've also been exploring these fascinating stories of the prophets.
we have.
We talked about Abraham's willingness to sacrifice his son, which was a powerful example of submission to God's will.
Right.
What other lessons can we glean from the stories of these prophets?
Well, take the story of Moses and Aaron.
Okay.
They were tasked with leading the Israelites out of slavery in Egypt,
Right.
which was no easy feat.
Definitely not.
They faced incredible challenges, confronting the Pharaoh and enduring hardship along the way.
I see.
But their story highlights the importance of divine guidance
Okay.
and the role of scriptures in providing that guidance.
It's like they had this roadmap,
Yeah,
this set of instructions from God to
exactly.
help them navigate through difficult times.
Right.
And their story connects to a broader theme in the Quran.
It does.
The idea that God communicates with humanity through revelation and that prophets play a crucial role in delivering that message.
That's a key observation.
Go ahead.
The Quran emphasizes that God's message is consistent and timeless.
Right.
But it's revealed gradually through different messengers to suit different times and contexts.
So it's like a chain of messengers,
Yeah,
each building upon the foundation laid by those who came before.
exactly.
And then you have the story of Jonah,
Right.
which feels much more personal,
Yes,
even relatable.
it does.
I mean, who hasn't tried to avoid responsibility or take the easy way out at some point?
We've all been there.
Jonah's attempt to flee from God's command
Yeah,
is something many of us can relate to on some level.
absolutely.
We've all had moments where we've tried to run away from our duties
Right.
or make choices that go against what we know is right.
Exactly.
But running away doesn't usually solve the problem, does it?
It doesn't.
Jonah ends up swallowed by a giant fish,
Right.
which is a pretty dramatic
A
consequence.
pretty clear sign.
What's the takeaway from his experience?
Jonah's story reminds us that running from our duties,
Okay.
especially those ordained by God, often leads to hardship and introspection.
Right.
But it also offers a message of hope. Jonah eventually repents and fulfills his mission. Yeah.
Showing that it's never too late to turn back to God
Okay.
and follow the path he has set for us.
So there's forgiveness, even after making mistakes or going astray.
Absolutely.
And this theme of God's mercy is woven throughout the Quran, isn't it?
It is. Chapter 37 doesn't just highlight the consequences of going astray,
Right.
but also emphasizes God's mercy and forgiveness for those who repent sincerely. It's a reminder that even when we falter, there's always a chance to turn back and seek God's guidance.
That's a really reassuring message.
It is.
It's like a reminder that we're not perfect,
Right.
but we can always strive to do better,
Absolutely.
to align ourselves with God's will. It's about growth, not perfection.
Well said.
Yeah.
And it's interesting how these stories of the prophets, while diverse in their details, all point towards this larger theme of seeking guidance from God, recognizing our own limitations,
Right.
and striving to live a life of purpose and meaning.
It's like they're providing us with a roadmap.
Examples of how to navigate the challenges of life
Right.
and stay true to our beliefs, even when things get tough.
Exactly.
They remind us that we're not alone in our struggles.
Precisely. They offer us wisdom and inspiration, showing us that even in the face of adversity,
Right.
we can find strength and guidance through faith and submission to God's will.
Now, we've talked about the prophets
Yes.
and the ultimate destinations of heaven and hell. But there's another fascinating aspect of chapter 37 that we haven't touched on yet.
Okay.
The way it directly addresses those who doubted the message of Islam during the Prophet Muhammad's time.
You're right. The chapter doesn't shy away from engaging with the skeptics and critics of the time, refuting their arguments and challenging their beliefs.
Interesting.
It's a dynamic exchange that reveals a lot about the context in which the Quran was revealed.
Okay, so let's dive into that.
Sure.
What were some of the prevalent beliefs or arguments that the Quran was pushing back against? What were the points of contention?
One striking example is how the chapter addresses the belief, common in some Arabian cultures at the time, that God would have daughters.
Right.
This idea was often used to justify associating lesser deities with God, diminishing his absolute power and uniqueness.
It's like they were trying to impose human limitations onto God to fit him into their existing worldview.
Right.
How does the Quran respond to this?
It firmly rejects this notion, stating unequivocally that Allah is far beyond any such human constructs.
Right.
It emphasizes his absolute oneness, his transcendence beyond any gender or limitations that humans might try to impose.
So it's a clear rebuttal of those who are trying to dilute the concept of God's absolute unity and power.
Exactly.
And there were also some strange ideas circulating about the jinn, right?
There were.
For those who might not be familiar, can you explain what jinn are and what those beliefs were?
Jinn, in Islamic belief, are beings created from smokeless fire. They have free will, like humans, but are invisible to us.
Some people at the time held the belief that God had some kind of relationship with the jinn.
Interesting.
Even claiming that jinn were present during the creation of angels.
Wow.
And witnessed them being created as females.
That's interesting.
Yeah.
It sounds like they were trying to bring God down to a human level.
They were.
To create these elaborate stories that diminished his uniqueness and power.
Right.
How does the Quran address these claims?
The Quran directly calls out these claims as blatant lies. Stating that such allegations are far removed from the truth about Allah.
Right.
It reinforces the idea of God's absolute purity, his transcendence beyond any need for companionship or interaction with other beings in the way that humans might imagine.
It's like the Quran is saying, don't try to put God in a box.
Right.
He is beyond your limited understanding.
Exactly.
It's a powerful message, especially in a context where people were trying to make sense of this new understanding of God and the universe.
Right.
Exactly. It's important to remember that the Quran wasn't just preaching to the converted.
Right.
It was actively engaging with a society grappling with a new set of beliefs.
Yeah.
And challenging the prevailing ideas of the time.
So it was more than just a spiritual text.
Absolutely.
It was participating in a cultural dialogue.
Yes.
Pushing back against misconceptions and offering a new way of understanding the world.
Right.
It's fascinating to see how chapter 37 navigates this complex landscape.
It is. And it's not just about debunking false beliefs. The chapter also addresses the consequences for those who stubbornly refuse to believe, even after being presented with clear signs and warnings.
It's like that verse where they lament, had we received advice from the ancients, we would have been Allah's faithful servants.
Right.
But it's too late for regret at that point, isn't it?
Yes, regret and despair are the dominant emotions for those who find themselves condemned on the day of judgment.
Right.
They realize the gravity of their choices, but by then, it's beyond their control.
The chapter serves as a stark reminder that we have a limited time in this life to make choices that align with our values and beliefs.
Right.
And that those choices have eternal implications.
It's a sobering thought.
It is.
But amidst all this talk of judgment and consequences, the chapter doesn't end on a note of doom and gloom, does it?
Not at all. In fact, it concludes with a message of hope and reassurance for those who believe and follow God's guidance.
Okay.
It reiterates the ultimate victory of God's messengers
Right.
and the triumph of truth.
And there's that powerful image of God's troops being the victors,
Yeah.
implying that those who side with righteousness will ultimately be supported and protected.
Absolutely.
It's a comforting thought for those who might feel outnumbered or overwhelmed in the face of opposition.
It is. It reinforces the idea that even though challenges and trials are inevitable,
Yeah.
believers will ultimately prevail with God's help.
We've covered a lot of ground already in this deep dive,
We have.
exploring the profound messages within chapter 37 of the Quran. It's been quite a journey.
From the affirmation of one God and the reality of judgment, to the inspiring stories of prophets and the stark contrast between heaven and hell.
Absolutely.
It's been an incredible journey.
It has.
But there's still one intriguing topic we haven't delved into yet.
Okay.
The concept of angels and jinn and how they fit into this larger theological framework.
Right.
We'll unpack all of that in the final part of our deep dive.
Sounds good.
Stay tuned. Welcome back to the deep dive. We've been on quite a journey through chapter 37 of the Quran,
It has been.
the aligners,
Yeah.
exploring what it means to live a life aligned with God's will.
Absolutely.
We've covered a lot of ground.
Yeah.
The concept of one God, the reality of Judgment Day, the inspiring stories of prophets, even those vivid descriptions of heaven and hell.
Right.
But there's one more fascinating piece of the puzzle we need to explore.
Okay.
The concept of angels and jinn.
You're right. Angels and jinn play significant roles in Islamic theology.
Yeah.
And this chapter offers some intriguing insights into their nature and purpose.
Okay, so let's start with the basics.
Sure.
For those who might not be familiar with these concepts.
Yeah.
Can you give us a brief overview of angels and jinn in Islamic belief?
Absolutely. In Islam, angels are considered divine beings created from light.
Okay.
They have no free will and exist solely to carry out God's commands.
So they're like these pure celestial beings completely devoted to God?
Yes.
And what about jinn? They're a bit more complex, right?
Yes, jinn are quite different from angels.
Okay.
They are beings created from smokeless fire.
I see.
And unlike angels,
Yeah.
they do possess free will.
Okay.
This means they have the capacity to choose between good and evil,
Right.
much like humans.
That's interesting. So they have this moral agency,
Yeah.
this ability to make choices that determine their path.
Right.
It makes me wonder,
Yeah.
how do these concepts of angels and jinn tie into the broader themes of this chapter, especially the idea of aligning ourselves with God's will?
That's a great question. You see, while angels exemplify complete submission to God's will,
Okay.
having no choice but to obey,
Right.
the jinn represent a different aspect of this alignment.
Okay.
Their existence highlights the significance of free will and the importance of choosing to align ourselves with God's guidance,
Okay.
even though we have the capacity to choose otherwise.
So in a way, the existence of jinn alongside humans
Yes,
emphasizes the value of our choices,
exactly.
the significance of actively striving to follow God's path,
Right,
even when we have the option to stray.
absolutely.
It's not about being forced into submission.
No.
It's about consciously choosing to align our will with God's.
Exactly. It's about recognizing our own agency
Okay.
and using it to make choices that bring us closer to God, that reflect our understanding of His will,
Right.
and our desire to live a life that pleases Him.
It's interesting to note that chapter 37 also addresses some misconceptions about angels and jinn that were prevalent at the time.
You're right?
Oh, right. We touched on this briefly earlier.
Yes.
What were some of those misconceptions and how does the Quran address them?
Well, one prevalent belief was that God had daughters,
Right.
a concept that was often used to justify associating lesser deities with God.
Yeah.
The Quran directly refutes this idea, emphasizing that God is far beyond such human limitations.
It's like they were trying to project human family structures onto God.
Exactly.
Which completely misses the point of his absolute oneness and transcendence.
Right. And there were also these strange ideas about God having some sort of relationship with the jinn.
Yeah.
Some even claim that jinn witnessed the creation of angels.
Wow.
And that they were created as females.
It's fascinating how those beliefs try to humanize God, to bring him down to a level that we can comprehend.
They do.
But the Quran firmly rejects these notions, doesn't it?
It does. The Quran emphasizes that Allah is far above such allegations,
Right.
highlighting his absolute purity and singularity. It's a reminder that we can't impose our limited understanding of relationships and social structures onto God.
Right.
He is beyond our comprehension in his essence and his actions.
It's like a call to humility.
Yes.
Recognizing the vastness of God and accepting that our human minds can't fully grasp his nature.
Absolutely.
And this emphasis on God's transcendence is really woven throughout this entire chapter, isn't it?
It is. From the affirmation of his absolute oneness
Yeah.
to the descriptions of his magnificent creations.
Right.
Chapter 37 consistently points towards the awe-inspiring power and majesty of God, reminding us of our place in this grand scheme of things.
It's a reminder that while we have been granted free will and the capacity to make choices,
Right.
we are ultimately accountable to a higher power.
Absolutely.
It's about finding that balance between recognizing our own agency and submitting to a will that is greater than our own.
Well said. It's about recognizing that true fulfillment lies in aligning our lives with God's guidance,
Right.
in striving to understand his will, and live in a way that reflects that understanding.
Wow, we've really come full circle, haven't we?
We have.
From the beginning of this deep dive, exploring the concept of one God and the importance of aligning ourselves with his will,
Right.
to understanding the roles of prophets, angels, and even jinn.
Absolutely.
It's been an incredible journey through chapter 37 of the Quran.
It has, and it's a reminder that there's always more to learn,
Yeah.
more to discover within the Quran. Each verse offers a new layer of meaning, a new insight into the nature of God and our relationship with him.
It's like peeling back the layers of an onion, revealing deeper and deeper truths with each reading.
Yeah.
And as we wrap up our deep dive into the aligners, I'm left with this lingering question. What does it truly mean to live a life aligned with God's will?
That's a great question.
Is it about strict obedience to rules and rituals? Or is there something more, something deeper that we should be striving for?
That's a profound question, and one that each individual must grapple with on their own spiritual journey. The Quran provides guidance,
Yeah.
but ultimately it's up to us to interpret that guidance,
Okay.
to apply it to our lives in a way that feels authentic and meaningful.
It's about finding that personal connection with the divine,
Yes.
understanding our place in the universe, and making choices that reflect our commitment to living a life of purpose and meaning.
Beautifully said. And as we conclude our deep dive,
Yeah.
I encourage you to continue exploring,
Yeah.
to keep seeking knowledge and understanding,
Right.
and to strive to live a life that reflects the profound wisdom and guidance contained within the Quran.
Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Islamic theology.
It's been a pleasure.
We hope it sparked your curiosity and inspired you to delve deeper into the fascinating world of the Quran.